Hello and welcome to my channel. This video will be the first of many videos that I plan to upload in my new series, Hidden Histories and Dark Discoveries. Talking about everything from the Great Emu War in Australia, Alexander Graham Bell and his ableist attitudes, as well as the molasses flood that happened right here in America in the 1800s. And you're interested in the eccentric, deceptive, and downright horrific events of history, I suggest you subscribe to this channel, click the notification bell, and don't forget to comment and let me know what I should be talking about next. For this first episode, I thought I would talk about the Bal des Ardents of 1393. Roughly translated into English, it means the Ball of Burning People or the Burning People's Ball. During this event, King Charles VI of France nearly died, and it nearly caused another riot in Paris. First, some things you need to know about King Charles himself. King Charles VI became King of France at only 11 years old after his father, King Charles V, would die of a complication with some form of infection that he had for 23 years. Let me try that again. King Charles VI was born to King Charles V and his mother, Queen Joanna of Bourbon, in December of 1368. When King Charles VI was only 11 years old, he would go on to take the throne after his father died of complications. King Charles VI of France was born to King Charles V and his mother, Queen Joanna of Bourbon, in December of 1368. At only age 11, King Charles VI would go on to be crowned as king after his father died of some form of complication due to this mysterious infection that he had had for over 23 years. However, due to his young age, King Charles's uncles would take regency until he was around the age of 20, which was pretty standard for the king to finally take back his throne. However, only a year after King Charles took the throne that he started to suffer from some form of psychosis. These episodes would often be sudden and have no warning at all. In most of them, he would go on to have amnesia and forget who he was, who his servants were, the fact that he was ever king, and he would also forget his wife and his children. The reason for these events are still up for debate, but the two most popular theories are that he had schizophrenia, which would have been passed down from his mother, or maybe a complication of typhus, which was a really common bacterial infection at the time, which could be passed from rodents, lice, or ticks. His first episode of psychosis would be in August of 1392. His first bout of psychosis would be in August of 1392 after he stormed towards Brittany with an army, and in the heat of August, how well to summarize that, let me try it again. His first episode of psychosis would happen in August of 1392. Prior to that, his friend and advisor, Olivier de Clisson, was nearly killed by assassin Pierre de Craon, who had fled to Brittany shortly after his botched assassination attempt. The Duke would not hand over this assassin, and so the king decided to round up his armies and just march towards Brittany with them. The king and his army set out July 1st. By August, they had come to a dense forest where a leper grabbed the king's horse's bridle and screamed that a traitor was in his ranks. For those of you that don't know, lepers are people who suffer from something called leprosy. It is not extremely contagious, not like it once was thought, but at the time they didn't know how contagious it was. Unfortunately, leprosy untreated can affect your skin, eyes, nervous system, and your lungs, making it difficult to breathe, see, and even feel pain. Nowadays, we know that only 5% of people who come into contact with leprosy long term actually will contract the disease. But at the time, the people thought that this was some form of divine punishment by God, and you could become a social outcast simply by guilt of association with a known leper. So this leper comes, nearly touches the king, which would have been the most horrific thing that could happen in these knights' minds, and so they started to beat the leper. I'm not sure what came about him. I don't know if he died. I know for sure that they didn't arrest him, but I assume that the leper maybe just ran off as soon as the beating started. Later that day, around noon, the pages were becoming extremely weak and exhausted due to the heat, exposure to the elements, and I assume also the walk. One of the pages holding the king's lance actually ended up kind of letting go, and it fell onto the king's helmet, which was held by another page. This, of course, brought about this crash or clang or whatever it was that startled the king, and for some reason, this sent him into his first psychosis. During this psychosis, he flew into a rage, drew his sword, and claimed that he was going to root out the traitor himself and started attacking his own men. It took several chamberlains and soldiers to actually get the king off of his horse, and by that point, he had killed at least one knight and wounded several others. By the time he stopped struggling, the king had slipped into a coma, and the army was forced to retreat back to Paris until the king could wake up and hopefully survive the incident. Due to this horrific fiasco that had taken place, his uncles who had previously held Due to this fiasco, his uncles who had previously held regency decided that it was best that they hold regency again, and so they took back their regency. These would be the same uncles that had regency before the king turned 20. So this brings us to the fateful day of January 29th, 1393. Something to remember as we go through the rest of this is that this is the 1300s. There is no electricity. The only light you have is by a torch often, or by a fire somewhere, maybe even a candle, and they didn't have toilet plumbing as we traditionally think. The whole ball was actually organized by Queen Isabeau to celebrate the marriage of one of her ladies in waiting. For whatever reason, King Charles and 5 of his nobles decided to entertain the crowd by dressing up as wild men. These wild men are mythological figures for that time period. They often appeared in different mythologies and different legends, stories. The inspiration was probably drawn upon by the Roman god Silvanus and the Greek satyrs. The point of wild men in these mythologies were to point out the wildness of nature as well as sometimes men. To get the costumes just right, the men had to have these skin-tight linens that were dipped in resin or wax and rolled in fibers of hemp. That way they could look shaggy and wild. They would also have masks on as well to hide their identities. Prior to getting the costumes on, the king had already warned torchbearers to not approach these wild men. However, one person didn't get the memo for whatever reason. King's brother, Louis I, Duke of d'Orleans, came fashionably late and quite drunk. So from here on out, this is where accounts, facts, stories, all of this becomes very muddled, and it's really hard to separate what is fact from what is a stretched truth, as well as an outright lie. What all of the accounts can agree on is that Louis I got too close with his torch. Some people say that he threw it at the wild men, and others say he was just trying to guess the identities and leaned a little forward, a little too much. An ember came out from the torch, and the next thing they knew, all of the nobles are on fire, or almost all of the nobles. Again, accounts become muddled about how many people were on fire, or if the king himself was even on fire. Again, all of the accounts become very muddled, but everyone agrees that the Duchess of Bourbon threw her very voluminous skirts over the king, either to pat out the flames that had already started or to protect him from the ones that were going on. In the aftermath, Louis I did not fare as well as his uncles. He was already very unpopular among his people for being a supposed womanizer, and this only made his popularity even worse. He was so unpopular that French theologist Jean Petit claimed to have seen the Duke buy demonic items from an apostate monk, as well as practice sorcery in an attempt of regicide. This regicide theory doesn't really make any sense because King Charles already had an heir, and even if King Charles had died that night, Louis I wouldn't have been regent and he wouldn't have been king. A lot of Parisians were also very angry. Not only was their king put in harm's way, but this was a very extravagant ball, and the people just didn't see why this ever needed to happen. In an attempt to calm the Parisians, King Charles's uncles decided to go to Notre Dame Cathedral, pay penance there, and then in a show of humiliation, walk in a parade next to the king on an extravagant horse to show how sorry they were. And that's it. That's all I have for you today. If you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe, click the like button, and share with a friend. And don't forget to leave a comment down below about what other unusual history I should cover.